Okay, so we're going to pick up from where we left off yesterday, right when we finished talking about the five pillars of Islam, and look more at the history of the Islamic Caliphate itself, and notably how the Caliphate expanded and developed over time. So Muhammad died in 632, and he was succeeded by Abu Bakr, who became known as the first rightly guided caliph. Caliph was the position of the head of both the Islamic faith and the Islamic caliphate. So kind of like a more powerful version of the Pope, the caliph was both a political figure and a religious figure. And I'll explain what the whole rightly guided part means in a little bit. But Abu Bakr succeeds Muhammad as caliph, and Abu Bakr decides to build off of what Muhammad had already done. Again, during his lifetime, Muhammad had already conquered and spread Islam throughout the western side of Saudi Arabia. And Abu Bakr wanted to build off of that. And so to do this, he called for a jihad, which is an Islamic holy war. And in this case, the purpose of Abu Bakr's jihad was to expand Islam throughout the Middle East and even eventually into North Africa. And as you can see by this map, Abu Bakr's jihad worked really, really well. Islam spread really, really far and spread really, really fast. And the caliphate grew rapidly. Okay. Now, if we were to look at what life was like under Islamic rule and what their governance was like, there are a number of interesting things that we find. First off, Islam, let me rephrase that. You were not required, conquered people were not required to convert to Islam. The Quran forbids forced conversions and says that a true conversion a conversion is only like legitimate if it's done willingly and by choice. So the Quran says you cannot force people to convert to Islam. Because of the Quran's prohibition on forced conversions, conquered people were not forced to convert to Islam, but Islam was an incredibly popular religion, and a lot of conquered people willingly converted to Islam. Both because, again, the religion was incredibly popular and people liked what it had to say, but also I think there were a fair number that converted out of the desire to gain full citizenship rights and full rights and privileges within the caliphate. The caliphate practiced religious tolerance, but not religious freedom. Just because you were allowed to practice a non-Islamic religion did not mean that non-Islamic religions had equal rights as Muslims. And so a number of people more than likely converted to Islam seeking to gain access to those privileges and rights. For example, non-Muslims were not allowed to work for the government or work in the government. So people wanting to get positions higher up in the government would need to convert to Islam or would need to practice Islam to get those. And this kind of illustrates how that within the Islamic Caliphate, there was a social hierarchy that was based off of religion. A person's religion determined their social status. So at the very top of this hierarchy were Muslims by birth, people who were born into Islam and continued to practice Islam. Beneath Muslims by birth, there were Muslim converts, so people who had been born and raised in another religion, but then converted to Islam later on. So even though they were practicing Islam, since they were not born and raised into Islam, they did not have the same level of privileges or rights that born and bred Muslims had. However, what's also interesting is that there was a hierarchy of non-Muslims as well. So notably, Christians and Jews were viewed more favorably than other non-Muslims. Muslims refer to Christians and Jews as people of the book, and within that phrase it has this connotation of a large number of similarities between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Again, they're all Abrahamic religions. They all utilize a holy book, and their holy book forms a central role in their religion. All three religions worship the same God. All three have similar beliefs and values and practices. And because of all these similarities, The caliphate viewed Christians and Jews as better than other non-Muslims, almost in a sense that they were half right, in the sense that, well, they were worshiping the right God, but they weren't doing it in the right way, was how I would describe the mindset. So they weren't fully equal with Muslims, but they were better than other non-Muslims who weren't even worshiping the right God. So, as I mentioned as well, within the Islamic Caliphate, there was religious tolerance, but not religious freedom. Again, in order to practice a non-Islamic religion, you were giving up a number of rights. You were not considered a full citizen. And furthermore, you had to pay a special tax called the jizya to practice a different religion. Hence why I would say there's tolerance, but it's not freedom. It's not equality. Regarding just general governance as well, there was relative freedom of government applied to conquered territories. Pretty much, conquered territories were allowed a high degree of autonomy and home rule as long as they paid their taxes. If they did not pay their taxes to the caliphate, then the caliphate would come down and crush them really hard. So, that was an important factor to take into account. But again, as long as people paid their taxes, there was generally freedom. There was a general degree of freedom and religious tolerance within the caliphate under Islamic rule. And just here quickly, kind of see the symbols for all three Abrahamic religions today. We focus on the Abrahamic religions in this unit because they have exerted probably the biggest impact on world history out of any religions. So here again, you have the Star of David representing Judaism, the cross to represent Christianity, and the star and crescent to represent Islam. And again, Christianity and Islam are the world's two largest religions today. And even today, the Abrahamic religions still are a pretty significant cultural force within the world. Anyway, continuing on with the history. So, following Muhammad's death is the reign of what are referred to as the rightly guided caliphs. So there are 4 rightly guided caliphs, and these are the first 4 caliphs who succeed Muhammad after his death. They are called rightly guided because within the Islamic community, they are generally viewed as being the proper choices to succeed Muhammad as leader. The last rightly guided caliph, Ali, is assassinated in 661. And following his assassination, the Umayyad family gains power. And the Umayyad family makes a number of changes to the position of caliph that start to create a lot of fractures within Islam that later develop into different branches. Notably, the Umayyads effectively take the position of caliph from being this joint role of political leader and religious leader, and effectively just make it a king. The position was no longer one that you would be appointed to based on how well people believed that you would lead both the caliphate and the religion. It just became another hereditary monarchy passing from father to son. The Umayyads moved the capital from Mecca to Damascus, illustrating a growing secularization or a growing concern for the political aspects of the job as opposed to the religious aspects. By moving the capital out of the holy city of Mecca to a city with no religious significance, Damascus. However, Damascus was a better choice for a capital from a political standpoint because it was in a more central location and it was easier to govern the territory from. So again, the move from Mecca to Damascus indicated that religion was becoming less important within the caliphate, at least within the government, and that politics and real-world concerns were becoming more central. And this transition did not go over that well with a lot of Muslims, who also took issue with how the Umayyads began to break from the tradition of the caliph, who traditionally the caliph would live would live his life as a way to try and serve as a model for how a good Muslim should live their life. The Umayyads did not live like this. The Umayyads violated a lot of the tenets of Islamic culture. Notably, the Umayyads lived very extravagant lives, and the flaunting of their wealth and power angered a lot of Muslims, as they viewed the Umayyads as not as deviating from Islamic ways and effectively corrupting the caliphate's government by focusing too much on secular affairs and secular power. However, as you can see, the Umayyad Empire was pretty big, encompassing most of the Middle East, most of North Africa, and even getting up into Spain. So there was a lot of territory under Umayyad control. Eventually, this dispute and this animosity toward the Umayyads contributed to really the only major split within Islam into the two major branches, Sunnism and Shiism. So the Sunni initially accepted the Umayyads and their successors as legitimate rulers, while the Shia rejected the Umayyads from the outset. The Shia believed that caliphs must be direct descendants of Muhammad, and as such, they rejected the Umayyads for not being descended from Muhammad. The Sunni, by contrast, believed that caliphs do not need to be descendants of Muhammad, as long as they follow Islamic ways and live in accordance with the Quran. Now, the Sunni eventually came to also oppose the Umayyads because they believed the Umayyads were not following the Quran and not living in accordance with Islamic doctrine. Within Sunnism as well, there is less emphasis on religious officials and the institutions of Islam. Whereas in Shiism, there is a greater emphasis on religious institutions and a greater role of religious officials. And of the two branches, Sunnism is substantially bigger than Shiism. Roughly 90% of Muslims today are Sunni, and only about 10% are Shia. And similar to the initial relationship between Protestants and Catholics, the Sunni and the Shia fought and argued a lot, frequently resulting in violence. A lot of the violence in the Middle East today stems from religious conflicts between Sunni and Shia, which really kind of creates a complicated political and cultural environment, as illustrated by this political cartoon where you see a U.S. soldier kind of stuck and wrapped up in this conflict between the Sunni and the Shia, kind of representing how this religious conflict has created almost a mess that it's hard to disentangle from effectively for American forces stationed in the Middle East today. So as I've kind of hinted, the Umayyads were extremely unpopular within both branches. Again, the Shia disliked them because they were not descendants from Muhammad. The Sunni came to dislike them because they viewed them as not living in accordance with the Quran. So in 750, the Umayyads were eventually overthrown by the Abbasids, who were much more popular and were able to create a much longer-lived empire and dynasty than the Umayyads. So the Abbasids lived in accordance with the Quran and did make the position of caliph more focused on religion to appease the Sunni, but they still emphasized the political aspects of the job more than the religious aspects. Notably, again, moving the capital to Baghdad, and really interestingly, creating a bureaucracy to help run their empire. And this is one of the first or earliest instances where a government establishes a bureaucracy to help itself run. Bureaucracies, if you want an example of a real-world bureaucracy, think of the BMV, or the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. Bureaucracies are institutions that are established with specific purposes and goals in mind. And the whole purpose of a bureaucracy is to achieve those goals or meet those purposes as efficiently and effectively as possible. And in historical terms, most governments today feature heavy uses of bureaucracy because, again, generally they are efficient ways to meet or to accomplish the tasks that government is set up to do. But throughout history, most of the time, governments did not utilize bureaucracies, and governance was much messier and much less efficient. So the fact that the Abbasids actually created a bureaucracy to help govern their empire really indicated that they were innovating in terms of their political structure. And the Abbasids were also able to grow really wealthy based on trade. If you look at this map here, you can kind of see that the Abbasid Empire, which was roughly, again, throughout the Middle East here, sits right between Europe and China, and as a consequence, sits on the most valuable trade route in the world at that time, the Silk Road. So during the reign of the Abbasids, China was one of the most, if not the most, sought-after trading partners in the world. There were a number of luxury goods that you could not get anywhere but China, things like silk and porcelain. And as such, trade routes connecting to China were really lucrative. And with the Silk Road going through the Abbasid Caliphate, the Abbasids were able to get really wealthy off of all of this trade going between China and Europe by taxing it and making merchants and traders pay fees and tolls to go through their territory. And this trade really strengthened the caliphate and made the Abbasids stronger and more stable than the Umayyads. However, if you noticed on the Abbasid slide, the Abbasid Caliphate was substantially smaller than the Umayyads. The Abbasids were not able to hold the entire caliphate together. Again, they did not have the support of Shia. Shia Muslims established the Fatimid Caliphate here in North Africa, based off of descendants from Muhammad's daughter, Fatima. And also, there were some surviving Umayyads who gained territory in Spain as well. So the Islamic world was not as unified as it was following the overthrow of the Umayyads and the establishment of the Abbasid Empire. But ultimately, the Islamic Caliphate still remained strong and still remained one of the more stable and stronger governments in the world, particularly when you compare it to what was going on in the rest of the world at this time. Again, this was Europe's dark age, while conversely, this was Islam's golden age. All right, so I hope that you found this or these two lectures enlightening or interesting. If you have questions, let me know. Send me an email. And we are nearing the end of our unit over world religions. So I will talk to you guys later.